All right, let's talk about a fascinating case study we'll call Company Z. Now, this was a huge global business that on the surface looks like it was firing on all cylinders. All their key metrics were green, every target was being hit. But underneath it all, the company was hemorrhaging millions of dollars. This is a story about how a perfect-looking dashboard can completely hide a financial crisis. And this quote right here, it's really the heart of the whole puzzle. It is the central paradox we are going to unpack today. I mean, how is it possible for a company to hit every single one of its targets and still be in serious financial trouble? Well, the answer, as we'll see, is buried in the details, in the assumptions, and in the hidden costs that nobody was even thinking to look for. You know, the whole investigation really kicked off with this classic C-suite showdown. On one side, you have the VP of Operations, and they are celebrating, popping champagne, because they hit a flawless 90% service level, a huge KPI for them. But on the other side of the table, you have the CFO, just staring at the budget asking, "That's great, but where did $5.25 million of our money go this year?" That single disagreement was the tiny spark that lit the fuse on this whole thing. So here's how we're going to get to the bottom of this. First, we're going to expose the major financial leaks that were just draining the company dry. Then we'll get into the hidden human cost. What happens when that pressure to perform becomes toxic? After that, we'll look at the brilliant, elegant solution they found, which was all about geometry, not just hiring more people. And of course, we'll wrap up with the final scorecard to see just how dramatic the turnaround was. Okay, let's dive right in by looking at where the money was actually going. And what's interesting here is that these weren't some complex accounting tricks. They were really basic, fundamental mistakes in their operations that were just adding up to millions and millions of dollars. The single biggest financial drain was rooted in a very, very human emotion: fear. We're talking about management's fear of failure, specifically the absolute terror of ever missing their big service level target. And that fear led them to make a really simple, but as we'll see, an incredibly expensive decision. To make absolutely sure they would never, ever dip below that 90% service level, the company intentionally kept a safety buffer of 150 extra employees. These were people on the payroll that their own forecasts said they didn't need. They were essentially hoarding staff, just in case, to avoid any possibility of risk. And what was the price tag for that fear? $5.25 million. Every single year. I mean, this just perfectly illustrates the problem, doesn't it? The company was obsessed with hitting its targets at any cost, instead of the right cost. That $5 million, that wasn't an investment. It was the price they paid for being insecure. All right, the next big leak came from a misunderstanding of this key operational term: shrinkage. You see, management made a huge mistake. They assumed that if an employee's computer said logged in, that meant the employee was actively working. But, as anyone who manages a remote team knows, logged in and being productive can be two totally different things. So they did a deep dive on their 3,500 remote agents, and what they found was that the actual shrinkage was 4% higher than what they had planned for. Now, I know what you're thinking. 4%, that sounds tiny, right? It's almost nothing. But when you apply that tiny percentage across a huge workforce, well, the effect is absolutely explosive. That little 4% difference translated to over 1,100 productive work hours just vanishing every single day. Let me put that another way for you. Company Z was paying the full-time salaries of 138 employees who were producing absolutely zero, nothing. But this wasn't just a story about spreadsheets and bad math. That intense pressure to hit those numbers, no matter what, had a direct and an equally expensive impact on their people. This is where we start to see the real cost of a toxic work environment. Okay, so you can imagine the finance department was absolutely in love with this number: 92% occupancy. To them, it meant their agents were busy helping customers for 55 minutes out of every single hour. On paper, it looks like peak efficiency. No wasted time, no wasted money. Beautiful, right? But what did that 92% actually feel like for the agents on the front lines? Well, it was brutal. It translated to just 26 seconds of downtime between calls. Think about that. That's less than half a minute to finish up notes from a really complex, maybe emotional customer call before you're thrown right into the next one. This quote just says it all. There was no time to breathe, no time to reset. This relentless pace led to massive burnout. The agents' error rates jumped by 15%. And attrition, that's the rate at which people quit, it doubled in just 90 days. So all the money they thought they were saving with this high efficiency was just being wiped out by burnout and poor quality work. And this is where the cost of that burnout becomes crystal clear. Management was just shrugging off losing 100 agents a month as, industry standard. But what they failed to do was calculate the real cost. Every single time an employee quit, it cost the company $5,000 in recruiting, training, and lost productivity. That so-called industry standard was actually a hidden $500,000 expense every month. So how do you possibly fix these kinds of deep, systemic problems without firing a bunch of people or spending a fortune on new tech? Well, the most elegant solution they found came from thinking differently about time itself. It was about geometry, not just headcount. So here was the core problem with their schedule. The company ran on this super rigid 9-to-5, Monday to Friday schedule. The problem is, customers don't live on a 9-to-5 schedule. A massive 40% of the entire week's customer volume came flooding in on Mondays and Tuesdays. This created an absolute disaster. They were critically understaffed when customers needed them the most, and then they were massively overstaffed on a quiet Thursday afternoon. And the solution? It was so simple, it cost $0, and it was a win for everybody. They shifted to a 4-by-10 model. Employees worked 4 10-hour days. This simple change gave the company 18% better coverage during that Monday morning rush, and here's the best part. It gave every single agent a 3-day weekend. So, after diagnosing all these issues, the financial leaks, the human cost, the scheduling mess, Company Z put these pretty basic fixes into place. And the results, after just 1 month, were absolutely dramatic. It just goes to show how much money is hiding in the fundamentals of your operations. So check this out. In just 30 days, they saved $120,000 on overstaffing costs. They recaptured 400 productive work hours every single day just by managing shrinkage properly. And their service levels stabilized at a much healthier, much more sustainable 88%. They proved that better performance can actually cost less money. The entire journey of Company Zed can really be boiled down into 4 powerful principles. 1, real efficiency comes from matching the shape of your staffing to the shape of your customer demand. 2, fear is expensive. Making decisions based on fear, like overstaffing, will cost you a fortune. 3, your data has to reflect reality, not some perfect version of what you wish was happening. And 4, the goal isn't just handling more volume, it's about better utilizing the people you already have. And this really brings us to the final, and I think the most important question. Company Zed's story, it isn't some rare, unique thing. These same problems, the cost of fear, toxic productivity, mismatched schedules, they are hiding in the data of countless organizations right now. The only question is, which one is hiding in yours?